a higher education system of such depth and such influence would only be possible if there was a strong foundation at the grassroots level in terms of what we call today primary and secondary education. Could you tell us about how this was done? How was education like for children?
Right. So, see, we can only make inferences because there is no one book which will tell you everything about how education was like, right? Even I have had to piece together a lot of evidence. But it is very clear that there was an excellent system of village pathshalas in which elementary education was imparted, and children learned how to read and write, to do basic arithmetic, grammar. They learned the stories in the epics, they learned about the stories in the Panchatantra. So all this we can see from the various stories itself, that how when they describe what's happening in those stories, we can make out that there was a vibrant system of pathshalas. So I mentioned the Vidyarambha ceremony where a child is initiated into alphabets, and both girls and boys had this ceremony. And then we also get a lot of evidence from the surveys that were commissioned by the British in the 19th century. Before the British imposed their educational policy, they conducted many surveys within India. So you can call it as the just the pre-colonial period or the pre-British period, and you will know what the basic elementary education system was like. So from that, you actually come to know what that there was actually, even though it was decaying, the primary education system had decayed under the Islamic rule. But even then, whatever was left of it was quite good, and you can see this in the surveys which have been conducted by the British themselves. So the results of the survey was lying in the British archives in London, and they were highlighted to the Indians by Dharampal. That's the reason Dharampal's book, The Beautiful Tree, is very important. Everybody should read this book because it talks about those surveys conducted on indigenous education of India by the British. So when Dharampal found out all that, he copied everything. He tried to, I don't, photocopy was not there. He copied everything, brought it back to India and published it as a book. So from those surveys, you can see that from different parts of India came reports of the excellent teachers, dedicated teachers, superior methods of teaching, and high attendance in schools. So you come to know that this was the kind of Pathshala system that existed. And Dharampal also discovered Thomas Munro's statement that every village had a Pathshala. And then Adams had given a report, William, I think William Adams was his name, who said that there were 100,000 pathshalas in Bengal alone. Okay. And also, the British noticed that the Shudras were in majority in many of the schools, while the Brahmanas were in lesser numbers. In Tamil Nadu, in Kerala also. So all those numbers are given in the surveys. There are tables which tell you that, for example, in Tamil-speaking areas, the Shudras ranged from 70% in Salem and Tinnevelly to 80%, 84% in South Arcot. So these are startling numbers where you are thinking that Shudras are not allowed to go to school, but then you're finding that Shudras are also in this going to schools and they are with the Brahmanas. And then in Malayalam speaking Malabar, Brahmin students constituted only 20% of school, of 20% of the student population, while the Shudras were 54%. Muslims were 27%. You find that in Bellary in Karnataka also. So this shows that India had a widespread system of general education, general schooling before the British came, and they studied us, and then they decided to change it all by imposing their own education system because they wanted to produce clerks. They wanted people who would be useful to them. So that's how they changed everything. And it was also noticed that the schooling system in India was better than the one in England because in England there was no elementary system until very late. It was quite late that when they were still debating on India's education policy. At that time, England was still languishing in illiteracy. Most people only knew how to just maybe read and write, and they knew a bit of the Bible. That's the only book they came across. So this is very interesting. Despite the degradation that came from the Islamic rule, we still had a functioning school system at the grassroots level. Okay, and there were also many low-cost innovations that were noticed by the British. For example, there is one Reverend Andrew Bell. He was touring through the Madras presidency, which consisted of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and a number of other states, today's states, quite a big, almost the whole of South India. And he noticed that the literacy was very high, and he was surprised. So he wanted to know how it's happening. And then he noticed that outside the schools in Madras presidency, there were heaps of sand that had been placed outside the schools, and the children were learning how to trace the alphabets on them. The older children were helping the younger children to learn the alphabets, to do simple arithmetic. And he noticed that even when the teacher is not around, the students are still learning. They're not making noise and playing, but the older children are teaching the younger children using the sand heap. So they didn't even need a blackboard. So he was astonished. He said, oh, we thought that in England we need blackboards, we need infrastructure, and that is why, because of that, we do not have high education, we do not have literacy. So, but actually, you don't need blackboards. You can do it this way. So, this is how it was called the Madras method. And you'll be surprised to know that Andrew Bell introduced this in England, right? And this was introduced even in Europe, West Indies, in Bogota, in Colombia. So that is how this system became very popular, especially the mentorship program, because they realized that they have very few teachers and there are so many students. So why not use the older children to teach the younger kids? So that was a revolutionary innovation for them. And so you can also go back in time and imagine what the pathshalas were like in ancient India. It must have been similar to this. Then, if you have time, I'd like to tell you about Reverend Robertson, who was another Christian missionary who wrote about his observations in Bengal. And he noticed a very unusual method of examination. So he said that once a month, all the schools, all the schools would send their students to one place. They would all meet in one place, and then the top student of one school would put a question to the top student of another school. And then if he could not answer, then it would go to the second student. If he could not answer, it would go to the third student. And then the same thing would happen from the other schools. You know, the other student, the top student of another school would put a question to this school student. So there would be this cross questioning. And this is the way, this was an examination actually. And the students would have fun. They wouldn't even feel like they're being examined. So Robertson pointed out that there is such a spirit of fun when an examination is happening. This whole thing, and Brahmins and Shudras are sitting next to each other and doing this. And sometimes the Shudra student is getting more marks in these examinations than the Brahmana student, and he doesn't mind. So imagine this kind of innovative examination, which was there even when the British have just come to India. So go back in time and imagine how much more innovation might have been there when there was no oppressive rule, right? So you see, even at the grassroots level, before the British imposed their crippling policies and their taxation, which is what ultimately starved off the education system. So we had a very well-functioning schooling system at the grassroots level.
Absolutely, Sahanaji. I mean, it's from innovative quizzes to outdoor learning to the best, I mean, the most innovative pedagogical methods that one could think of. Thank you for sharing that.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Chitti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.